Welcome to the Behind the Connection podcast. This is the podcast that covers all things internet and technology related. The good, the bad, the complexities, and the realities. We talk about it all right here on Behind the Connection. I'm your host, Tyler Rasmussen. Today's topic, we want to cover some common misperceptions and myths that surround internet connectivity. And we definitely want to spend some time talking about how the coronavirus has affected connectivity in the internet, both locally, nationally, and globally. So I've got a couple great guests in the studio today. Brent Simmons is one of the geniuses that works at STRATA with us. We convinced him to leave his desk and come be a guest for us. He's our network operations manager and does some fantastic work for STRATA. We've also got Shelly Ward here with us, and she's our network operations center supervisor. Appreciate you coming and joining us.
Yeah, thanks.
A couple of the really smart technical people that make all of the connectivity happen for STRATA and its customers. So we're glad to have you guys. We want to take just a minute and give you guys a chance to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about what your day-to-day looks like at STRATA. Shelly, do you want to go first?
Sure, I'll go first. So I'm Shelly Ward. I've worked for STRATA Networks for going on 15 years, network operations supervisor. Born and raised in the Basin, grew up in Altamont. Yeah, that's me, I guess.
Altamont.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, she's a Longhorn.
Yes.
How about you, Brent?
Yeah, Brent Simmons. I've been here for even longer, 19 years, I think I'm going on.
Mm-hmm.
So, born and raised also in the Basin, big town of Tridell.
That's right.
Yeah, we like it rural, keep it rural here, I think. So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about, let's start with Brent. Tell us a little bit about what your day-to-day looks like, Brent. And actually maybe describe some of the teams that you work with. You're obviously a manager, so you've got several teams that you work with. What does your day-to-day look like?
A lot of screen time for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in front of a computer most of the day, every day. My team is basically responsible for the design, maintenance, the build out of the network. So when we say the network, we're saying, I mean, the A to Z connectivity. So from the customer's premise through the core of our network to the world. So the connections that bring the internet to people's homes all the way through.
Great. So you're monitoring that to make sure it's all healthy and functioning and proactively identifying issues that might be arising, and how do you manage that? How do you react to some of the things that you deal with on a daily basis? So
we have a lot of tools that we use, a lot of software. We spend a lot of time researching tools that we can use and software that we can use to monitor, monitor basic connectivity throughout different intersecting points in the network. Again, my whole team gets a lot of screen time, but we, along with that, it comes from the design. And we spend a lot of time researching design methods and ways to make our network more resilient so we can manage not just outages and failures, but even planned maintenances. So, a lot of the work we do that isn't even seen is because we've built so many layers into the network that we can keep things running throughout the day-to-day operation and maintenance at night. And then planning way ahead. So, if you take the example of this, what we have going on right now, we try to keep enough bandwidth available throughout our network and to the world so that we can deal with these situations without having to react too quickly. We have bandwidth basically available to manage these type of situations.
Awesome. And we're going to come back to, Brent's one of those guys that he can talk technical jargon so well that he can get me like really confused and dazed pretty quickly. But we're going to come back here in just a minute. We're going to break down some common definitions or terms that we use within our industry, and consumers use them too, but make sure that we all understand the terminology that we're using. And anyway, so okay, thanks for that introduction, Brent. Appreciate it. Shelly, how about you?
So my team, we work 24 hours a day. We help kind of proactively catch problems that might arise in the network. If equipment or things go down, we try to make sure that the people who need to fix those problems can fix it and try to proactively help with those to help minimize any customer downtime. So we're 24 hours a day. We also troubleshoot any internet problem that anybody calls in about. So anything really, from Wi-Fi to maybe a circuit issue, taking errors and doing, things like that. We also troubleshoot cable TV, any problems there. We help with those things as well, and dispatch technicians and things after hours. So
great. So you're 24/7. Team of what? 10 or 12 at least?
We have 15 right
people,
now.
Scattered both in Roosevelt and Vernal locations. And they're, so you guys keep using a term like the network, and we might want to break that down just a little bit. When we say the network, what does that mean to a consumer in terms of maybe high level components, right? Because there's like consumer portions of the network, and then, so maybe Brent, do you want to take a stab at that? Because there's different elements that can break, for instance, right? Or stop functioning correctly.
Yeah. I mean, when I think of the network in terms of segments or we define it as an access network, meaning, so the first segment would be the access network, meaning the connection between the customer's home and our network edge. So that could be a box on the side of the road that we would call a cabinet. It could be a central office,
So we often refer to those cabinets as a node, right?
Yeah.
And okay.
Okay, so a cabinet or node. And then from there, we would move into the core of our network. So we take all those aggregation points, those nodes, those access networks, and we aggregate them into our core network. So from there is where the redundancy and resiliency starts. We build directional networks so that we have backup paths. We build different. We sometimes mix technologies in that network so we can create more resiliency there. And then again, we take that core network and we have other edges that connect to that network. So like an internet edge, we would connect out to an upstream carrier, like your big names, where we connect to the actual internet where the core of the internet sits.
So physically, where do those like handoffs with the big carriers happen, Brent? Is it in one single location? Is it in multiple locations? Give us an idea in terms of something that a consumer would understand.
Sure. So that's a good question. So today we connect directly to tier 1 providers in both Denver and then in 2 locations in Salt Lake City.
So what does tier 1 mean?
Well, tier 1 is really just it's a definition that they create for themselves. So it's it's your big names, your AT&Ts and Verizons. They have the most connection points on the network, and there are there are definitions of this and maps you can look at to see it. Our connection points, and this is something anybody could see if they were to trace through. It's Cogent, Hurricane Electric, and Zayo are our big 3 right now that we use to directly peer to the internet.
So Strata maintains physical connections to the internet in both Salt Lake and Denver. Why 2 locations?
Well, it provides a level of resiliency that we feel like we need for our customers. So our networks even physically split those directions. So our fiber, for example, can leave Vernal and go to Denver without having any reliance on the Roosevelt to Salt Lake side. So, technically speaking, and this does happen, we can lose those carriers on either side and maintain connectivity to the internet for our customers all the time.
So you just said our fiber, Strata's fiber. Are you talking about a single strand?
Not typically. So,
and even if it were a single strand, and we've talked about this once or twice before, capacity of a single strand of fiber is almost mind blowing. But maybe for the listener, scope, the capacity that Strata owns and maintains and operates that's leaving the Uinta Basin in multiple paths.
Sure. So we almost never would have any single strands of fiber going to these connection points, but even with that, most of our connection rides on just several strands of fiber because we use other technologies on top of that to layer on higher speeds. So, for instance, we'll have multiple 100 gig paths going from Roosevelt or Vernal to Salt Lake on single or dual strands of fiber.
Gotcha.
And technologies allow this. And and a lot of it has to do with just maintenance or cost. It's more effective to put multiple connections on single fibers where you're lighting that long distance path, one time and just layering on different, we say colors of light or wavelengths of light.
Yeah, we're going to come back to that because Brent's doing really good. I know Brent really well. He's doing really good to try to keep this conversation at a, typical consumer level. But we're going to come back and talk about, what does 100 gig even mean? You've used several terms there that some might not fully understand. We'll come back and talk about that a little bit. So, a little background, which I think the listener obviously knows, but this whole virus pandemic has pushed an unprecedented amount of users to their home to do schoolwork online or to do their actual work online, right? As a teleworker. According to a couple online sources that I've seen recently, popular video conferencing apps, which we're using a lot of right now too, but apps like Zoom and Microsoft Teams and Google Hangouts, they've been downloaded nearly 70 million times just in the last week, which is mind-boggling. Which, as an interesting side note, the founder of Zoom, Eric Yuan, I believe I read online that his net worth has increased over $4 billion since the start of COVID-19. It's pretty crazy. So his business is doing very well. And I've read online also that usage on these platforms is up as much as 500% over the last month to 6 weeks. So surely that's having an impact. I mean, some of those same things are happening here in the basin. Obviously, we've got a lot of students, school districts using these same tools. STRATA's using these tools. So what impacts are we seeing on the network here locally? Or are we seeing any? You guys want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting about Zoom for sure. Another one that if you look at, and if you're comparing stocks, is like a teledoc or a telemedicine apps have just skyrocketed, and the underlying technology is very similar, right? They're transforming the way we communicate with patients and teachers and things. And what will be interesting to see how if it levels back out, if you see the trend stick around, but from our network perspective, we have seen a pretty substantial jump in traffic. I think we're fitting right along with the national numbers that I'm seeing. Mm-hmm. So to put it in real terms, I mean we saw about during the day, which is obviously the slower time when kids are at school and people are at work.
Historically,
sure. So we've seen about at times about a 60% increase in overall bandwidth during that space of time, which isn't a problem because again, these are typically off hours. So it's, the network handled that well. We saw no issues. Where we could get into issues, and luckily we haven't, are at peak times. So peak times we've seen as high as about a 30% increase in traffic, which
peak times would probably be anywhere from 8 p.m. at night to 11 p.m. at night when we're all sitting down and streaming our Netflix and our Amazons and everybody's on their devices checking their social feeds, correct? Is usually absolutely. That window? Yeah,
and peak times have kind of pushed both directions a little bit. We've seen the last couple of years even. So, I mean, we really start to pick up closer to 6 o'clock and we definitely go through till midnight before we see much of a drop in traffic. Mm-hmm. So about a 30% peak time increase, which, that's a big increase at peak. And like I was saying earlier, we've done well. We've planned ahead, not necessarily for this type of thing, but we typically try to stay about a year ahead on what we foresee in the future coming up. So that's, in this case, it served us well.
So this might be an unfair question, but so I know that bandwidth, and actually, before I even ask this question, let's break that down a little bit because we're using some terms, and maybe Shelly can help us with this. Her team is the team that really gets to work, directly with the consumer on a day-to-day basis. But we're using a lot of terms as both in this conversation and as consumers. We kind of use them interchangeably. We use terms like bandwidth and internet and broadband and what are some of the others? Wi-Fi and data. Yeah. We use them kind of interchangeably. Are they the same, or do they have subtle differences or drastic differences in your sphere? The
biggest thing that I've noticed when we talk to customers, we have people calling in and saying that their Wi-Fi, their Wi-Fi is broken or their Wi-Fi is down, and they're using that word interchangeably with broadband or with their connection.
Mm-hmm. With internet in general.
Yeah. Yeah, and they're different things. So a lot of the time we have to just educate, as to what Wi-Fi actually is. Wi-Fi is your actual Wi-Fi signal that's being sent out within your home from your router.
Okay.
It is different than broadband or internet, that's used interchangeably.
So in theory, I'm going to try to break this down even further. In theory, your internet from your service provider like STRATA could be working perfectly fine, correct?
Yes.
And what I mean by that is the service from, our core network to your home could be working perfectly fine.
Right.
But the Wi-Fi within the home, the wireless signal that's being distributed from the modem or the router could be creating some issues.
Right.
What would be some of those common issues?
So just kind of depending on the interference or whatnot within your home, I mean, you could have some things that are actually causing problems within that, the frequencies that are there. You could have, say, a neighbor's garage door or something that could be opening and closing that could be causing interference on the 2.4 network. So just an easy thing to fix is just move them over to the 5 gigahertz network, and they have connectivity again. So just things like that could be within a neighborhood, like my neighborhood. There are so many different Wi-Fi connections within my neighborhood that it's actually pretty. There's a lot of interference, and if you try to use your 2.4 network, it's almost unusable. And so I have a lot of neighbors that are like, I can't use my connection, and as soon as we get them moved over to their 5 gigahertz connection, it seems to work again.
So sorry, yeah. So you're referring to a 2.4 gigahertz and a 5 gigahertz network, which I'm going to pretend I have no idea what you're talking about. What does that mean? So are you talking about two different wireless signals that are being broadcast from your wireless modem router in the home? If you're using a STRATA issued device, probably, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the managed Wi-Fi service does come with both the 2.4 frequency and the 5. The 2.4 frequency, just has a lot more interference on it just by the way it's I guess built is the best way I could describe it.
It's been around a lot longer, and so there's just a lot of devices that use it.
Right. And so the 5 gigahertz frequency is just a lot less interfered with. There's a lot more channels that you can actually use. So you could actually, like I could be on, one channel that's, 100 channels away from another neighbor of mine or something to that effect. And so it's not interfered with as much, and, it's a lot better connection for the most part, depending on kind of what you're using it for. So
yeah, and I've worked in the industry for nearly 20 years too. And when you start talking channel interference, you can lose me pretty quickly. But that's one of the common issues, right, for Wi-Fi. And as a consumer, they probably just feel like, I don't want to have to manage this, right? Like, this is confusing to me. A lot of consumers, some are probably technical enough to handle that on their own. So obviously they can call your team, and your team will help them work through those issues, right?
Yeah.
At no cost, right? I mean, if we do provide a managed Wi-Fi service where we provide a preferred device in the home that helps us to manage the Wi-Fi experience in the home, correct?
Right. Yeah. And we have a lot more tools to see into the home with the managed Wi-Fi service. It's just actually quite helpful, as compared to somebody that doesn't. It's really hard for us to know for sure what's happening inside the network.
Yeah, absolutely. So some other common Wi-Fi issues. Channel interference is the first one you mentioned, but what are some others? I mean, like, are there issues with the types of devices that are connecting to the Wi-Fi, the distance that they're trying to connect from, all of those different things, right?
Walls are a big issue. Yeah. Number of walls you have to go through to get the signal back. You have to remember that the device yourself, the device itself is a lot weaker than the router. So the signal might be able to get to the device, but getting back to the router can sometimes be a big cause of problems in the home.
So just a common scenario, let's throw out a simple analogy or scenario. Say, would a customer expect to have a different experience if they're connecting on Wi-Fi with an iPhone 5 in comparison to an iPhone XS? Why?
Yeah, legacy devices, older devices have a lot. Brent could probably explain it better, but they definitely cause a lot more problems on the network with Wi-Fi. So we try to tend to, of course you can't really not use those devices if you're using them, but just identifying them and knowing that they are causing a problem. Sometimes, like, if you're having connectivity issues, we can say, okay, this device here is, older, an iPhone 5, let's shut it off for a minute and see what happens. And a lot of the time it's, helpful.
It'll improve the experience.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we've tried to break down bandwidth and broadband and internet and Wi-Fi and their differences just a little bit. We could spend probably 30 minutes just on that, but let's jump back because Brent was using the term bandwidth quite a bit. And Brent, you've talked about like off-peak and on-peak usage increases that have happened since the virus and situation. How does that relate to Strata's overall capacity? Any concerns that you have there as the individual that manages the teams that's monitoring that very closely?
I mean, we're always concerned about capacities and managing those capacities. But again, it kind of goes back to planning. I mean, and I have the benefit of saying that we've had these teams for quite a while, and so we have a lot of experience with each other. We know what's going on. A lot of us have grown up with the network, you could say even. So we just understand it really well. And so that helps over time as we plan and we build. We can see what's going on. We're really focused on that. I mean, that's a big part of our job. So it's not that we don't ever have issues, but for the most part, as far as bandwidth concerns go, even with this, we've maintained pretty good control. We haven't seen any large issues that have affected the network as a whole.
So let's jump back to that original question I was going to ask too. So if you were to eliminate the COVID-19 scenario and the increases that we've seen in the last 30 to 45 days, how much has bandwidth usage as in aggregate, all of Strata's consumers combined, and then we're transporting it out to that internet connection point, how much does it increase year over year over the last 3 years, for instance? Do you have a figure that you could tell the listener?
Yeah, I mean, boy, exact numbers. We have reports on this,
But it's exponential, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, typical year, without having the numbers we probably grow as far as internet bandwidth in the neighborhood of 100% per year. So that's something that we're always planning for, that we're always seeing ahead, and that's why I said earlier, we try to stay about a year ahead with our overall bandwidth. If you consider, I'm talking about bandwidth to the internet, so outside of our network. And then bandwidth inside of our network is just a constant evolution. I mean, there's almost not a week or a month that goes by that we're performing some maintenance, increasing capacities here or there. I mean, you have to remember it's a large network, and there's pieces that age and we replace, and then these capacities run out and we replace, and so it's constantly evolving internally and then externally as well. So,
okay, great. So, Shelly, have there been any new or common problems that have popped up recently with more kids at home, more teleworkers at home that are different or unique issues that you haven't typically dealt with in the past, or maybe they're not new, they're just more frequent?
Yeah. So it's bandwidth. I mean, I'd say about 2 weeks ago, we actually, kind of when everything started, we had taken probably 25 to 30 new bandwidth tickets that are just regarding bandwidth itself. Customers would call in and be, having a problem with their connection, and coming to find out they were maxing their bandwidth. And so trying to get, any type of faster speed at the home, sometimes it's not possible, but, trying to push fiber speeds or, even coax speeds or whatnot. That's kind of the biggest thing we've seen so far.
So you're basically saying that we have users that are calling your team because their internet's not working right, and their experience is slow or poor, the quality is poor, and you're finding that maybe the speed that they're subscribing to, whether it's 10 megabits per second or 25 megabits per second, is not really sufficient to handle what they're trying to do with multiple devices on the network. Is that
right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's use my home as a simple example. I know on any given day now, I mean, I've stated this in the past, I've got 2 high school kids, one junior high and one elementary. So on any given day from 8 to 1 o'clock now, they're all on a device doing schoolwork. And in reality, they're probably all using a Zoom video conferencing type app with some of the recent announcements from the school district where they want them touching bases with their teacher pretty frequently. So what kind of bandwidth consumption or totals is a household like mine likely using? If you've got 4 simultaneous Zoom streams going at one time, give me an example of what I should be subscribing to have an optimum or an optimal experience?
So I would like to see you on a 25 meg package at least. I'm not sure what a Zoom stream would actually use, but just in kind of what you've explained to me, I would like to see at least 25 meg from your connection. Your upload stream actually plays a bunch into that, just because you know your kid's talking to their teacher, that actually has to be sent out to the world.
Yeah,
And
so maybe break that down just a little bit further. So the download piece, there's two components to the speed, right? There's the
Right.
download speed and the upload speed.
Yeah.
And let's try to make it logical as much as we can for the listener. So the download component is the information you're receiving from the internet or from the outside world, and anything you're pushing up, like you said, if you're pushing up an audio signal or a video signal, it's got to be uploaded, which is a different speed.
Right.
And Strata's packages are usually they're different, right? They're not synchronous, or they're usually like a 25 and 5 or a 50 and 10, right?
Yep.
Okay, so maybe talk through that just a little bit. You were going down that road anyways. But.
Yeah. So like I was saying, with your kids at home using Zoom, so if you've got 4 kids at home, you know, talking to their teachers at the same time, your upstream traffic is probably, I mean, I wouldn't think that it would be maxed at that point, but you'd be using quite a bit. So what we find is that, you know, if you're maxing out your upstream traffic, or if it's really close, your downstream traffic can sometimes really feel like it's slow or feel like it's stopped. Mm-hmm. And so we do have that problem as well, as, you know, we have a lot of customers calling in and needing additional bandwidth, not only downstream, but upstream, because of, you know, schoolwork and things.
So are there some simple things that an internet consumer could do? Like, for instance, you could shut your video feed off, correct? And just send audio up. That would help alleviate some pressures. Anything else that you might suggest in this particular situation? So
sometimes consumers have, let's say, an iPhone backup that could be running, you know, and sometimes they don't even know, you know, they set it to start backing up when they plug it into their charger and it's on Wi-Fi. It'll automatically begin that backup. And so just being aware of the devices that could possibly be backing up, or devices that could be doing something on the network that you might not be aware of, that's definitely a big thing.
Yeah, that one's a tough one, right? Because you've got a device doing something on your network that you're not visibly seeing, and you have no idea that it's actually performing a function, and it's impacting, for instance, your Netflix stream. Right. So what are some other common devices or applications that might be doing stuff in the background that a consumer wouldn't necessarily even know potentially? So
we've actually had issues where like maybe a PC or something of some sort could have actually gotten compromised, and you know the virus is actually using a lot of their bandwidth to do whatever it's designed to do. And so we've seen that happen. You know, it's not super frequent, but it's definitely been a thing.
Brent, any other suggestions from you on devices that might be doing things in the background?
We've certainly started to see a lot more traffic from devices like video doorbells. You know, some people might think that those are only active when somebody rings the bell, or you know, but if they're not set up correctly, for instance, you know, some of the popular ones with motion detection, if that's not properly set up, they could technically be streaming out video constantly, you know, sending video up. Even with motion, I mean, there's a lot of activity that can be going on outside that will cause that to burst traffic up to record that stream up in the cloud, you know, up in the internet. So I've seen a lot of that growing and growing. Those have become really popular over time. So.
Yeah, that is very common. So, okay. So Shelly, I take it from your description that you're suggesting that some consumers might actually need to upgrade their speed, get a faster internet connection option, assuming that it's available. Right. I mean, we're not foolish enough to just say fiber is available ubiquitously to everybody in the Uinta Basin, although we wish we could snap our fingers and make it that way, correct? Right. And even if fiber is available, sometimes consumers don't choose to use it to its full potential, correct? So you probably hear this. You have a customer that will call in and say, Strata just installed fiber at my home a month ago. My experience is no different. Why? So this is a hard one for people to realize that, you know, let's say they're on a 10 meg package on copper, you know, and at that time they were struggling on the 10 meg package that they had. Well, of course, we install fiber and we've not changed the package that they're subscribing to. That, you know, they're maxing their bandwidth. Let's go ahead and increase that package up to, you know, whatever you're needing, 25 meg if it was in your case. And then they'd have much better
speed, much better bandwidth. And, from that point, with fiber, a lot of the time we find either it's bandwidth related or it's a Wi-Fi problem. I mean, beyond that, it's rare that it's actually the fiber itself.
Mm-hmm.
So
right. Okay. So interesting. So, do you offer any like free trial periods for people to test it and be like, well, hey, I don't really want to pay $10 more,
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
I don't want to pay $10 more if my experience is going to be the same. What do you guys do to offset that to allow people to see if it's actually different?
Well, we would definitely, if anybody was calling in and just questioning, I don't feel like it's the bandwidth, then, I'd definitely give them a trial for, a couple weeks and just, let me know. We'll call you back and see what you think. And
Well, and we're actually doing that right now, right? I mean, to offset and to hopefully alleviate some of the pressures that some of these families are feeling, Strata has offered a free 90-day speed bump. So any speed that's available at your location, we're going to give it to you for free, no cost above and beyond what you're currently paying, and allow you to utilize the full bandwidth capabilities that your connection can provide, correct? So anybody that wants that can call in and get that turned on from your team.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so speed tests. ISPs have a love-hate relationship with speed tests. At least I feel like we do. Do you guys agree?
Oh, yeah.
We use it as a tool.
Mostly hate.
Yeah. We use it as a tool to help people troubleshoot, but then consumers also use speed tests to try to convey to us what their experience is. So why do ISPs hate speed tests?
So it depends on how you do the speed test.
So what are you trying to say, Shelly? I mean, are there different ways to conduct a speed test?
Yeah.
And what might influence or affect the results of a speed test?
So a lot of the things we've talked about, so Wi-Fi, so if you're doing a speed test on Wi-Fi and you're, of course, struggling with some Wi-Fi problems, you're going to have a poor speed test. If you're doing a speed test connected directly to your router, that more than likely will be a true speed test if you're testing within Strata's network. So, there are a couple of different variables. So
when you say testing within Strata's network, what does that mean?
So we have an actual speed test server that you could actually speed test with. And what that does is it eliminates anything outside our network that we can't control. So
once again, let's go a little further. What does that mean? If I'm conducting a speed test and you're saying I might actually land on a speed test server that's outside of Strata's network, what might be an example of that? A common one?
So let's say CenturyLink or something, in Salt Lake.
So if I do a simple Google search for speed test, I land on a server that's in CenturyLink. Maybe it's not even in Salt Lake. I don't know, right? It's possible that they're doing a speed test. So when you're saying it's outside of Strata's network, how might that influence the results that one's getting? Yeah,
so we have no control over what's kind of happening on CenturyLink's network. So say they have something, maybe that site's even down. It's hard to say. Or they could be having troubles themselves there. It's outside our network, so we have no control over that test. If you're actually testing within our network, we know we're testing everything that Strata has control over, and we can see the full potential of that line.
So how do I get to a Strata speed test server?
So we use it's a very well-known system from Ookla for our internal speed test, and just going to their website, the likelihood is it's going to find that one because it uses like geolocation to pinpoint you to the server. But it does happen. I've seen it myself several times where it kicks you over to a different server, and that could be based on congestions that it's seeing. I mean, even though it's local, it's in our network, that doesn't mean that it's not being. I mean, it's getting used a lot. I mean, so and it's a robust server. It has a lot of bandwidth to it, but we'll literally have thousands of tests run against that server a day. So even a couple of other people testing at the same time are going to affect the results of that speed test.
Yeah. Okay. So let me throw a couple scenarios at you guys. Let's assume that I have fiber connectivity to my house. I subscribe to the highest package available to me, which is 1 gigabit per second or 1,000 megabits per second. I run connected with an Ethernet connection speed test on a laptop. So I'm connected from my laptop physically to my modem router, and I get 900 megabits per second, let's say, which is pretty dang close to that full gig. And then I'm standing in the same spot on my iPhone, and I run a speed test, and I get 350 megabits per second. Why does that happen? Brent, I'll throw that one at you. That's a tough one.
Well, I mean, it's just an understanding of the connection, right? So Wi-Fi even though, they throw the numbers out, Wi-Fi, and if you look at your connection speed, you'll see those into the 600, 800 megabit range, but it's just not, that doesn't mean it can actually move that much traffic. So just the Wi-Fi connection itself isn't actually capable of going at that rate.
You're saying that the actual technology, the Wi-Fi technology itself can't, depending on the device you're using to run the test, right? It can't actually run at that speed.
I mean, we've set up lab scenarios in perfect environments and gotten really good speeds. I mean, and 600 plus megabit speeds, but it would be difficult to get a connection speed a lot higher, at least with technology. Now, as we move forward, things are going to improve, and that's going to improve with it. But it would be pretty rare to see something that high connected to a Wi-Fi signal, and a lot of that has to do with the device itself. You have no idea what that device is. We've seen in some instances newer iPhones able to push a lot more bandwidth than older iPhones and older other phones.
So, Shelly, another scenario. So, say I live in a multi-story home, 2 or 3 story home, right? Basement and a top floor, and I'm running a speed test from a 2nd story corner of my house, and I'm seeing like 1.5, 2 megabits per second, and I'm absolutely frustrated with Strata. I want to scream because I know I'm subscribing to a 50 megabit per second plan, and I'm obviously not getting that speed. Why?
Because it's your Wi-Fi. You're running Wi-Fi speed tests. It also kind of depends on the radio, like we talked about the frequency that you're connected to, but we're just like Brent had mentioned earlier. You're going through multi levels, multi walls, whatever else is between you and the router that's causing you to slow down quite a bit.
Okay, so what are you going to do to help me in that situation? Because I'm just frustrated as a consumer.
Yeah, and this happens,
It happens all the time, right?
Yeah, so I would probably suggest getting somebody out to check out the actual Wi-Fi signal within your home. And our technicians have these mesh units basically that are just like access points that we could actually install on that side of your house that would actually connect to your managed Wi-Fi device and broadcast that back to the managed Wi-Fi device. So to give you a lot better connection there all the way on the other side of your house. So,
yeah.
All I would add is, if you think you have a connection problem, you probably do. If you're not getting those speeds, then there likely is something wrong, and we want to look at it. We want to help. We want to help the customer, and we have tools that will allow us to do that. It sometimes is the connection itself, that access connection. It's rare on fiber, but it does happen. But even if it is a Wi-Fi issue, it's very likely that we're going to be able to help you improve that. And our tools are getting better so that we can actually see some of those issues without you having to call in, without the customer having to call in. But a lot of times we still need a call to initiate that help. We have to know that it's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, encouraging the customer, if they're experiencing something that's not optimal, give us a call, right?
Yeah.
Like Shelly said, you've got a team that's there 24/7. That's what we pay them to do.
Yep.
They're trained and skilled and educated to be able to look into a customer's connection and hopefully be able to identify the issue and get it corrected.
Right.
So,
well, they won't complain about having to take less calls. We want it to work well. We would have no reason for it not to want it to work well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. To emphasize, as we start to wrap up this conversation, anybody that's having a bandwidth issue, Strata's done several things to try to, as much as we can, minimize the impact on internet subscribers in the Uinta Basin over the past 2 weeks. There have been several things we offered for a couple weeks, as the schools were making the transition to getting students at home and starting their online schoolwork. We offered basically free internet connections for all new subscribers that met that criteria of having a student or an educator in their home. And we saw tremendous response. And we need to express our appreciation to our employees. They worked very hard. Sometimes I think they were seeing order volumes of like 3 times typical daily volumes based on that offer. And so want to express our appreciation to them in responding, and also our appreciation of the patience and cooperation of our customers that have worked with us the last 2 weeks. We have had some situations where we've had to push those orders out 2 or 3 days to get to them all. But all in all, it's been a very wonderful thing that we've been really thrilled to be a part of. That offer has ended as of last Saturday. And so once again, we hope we've taken care of the majority of the critical needs that are there for those in our community that need internet connectivity right now. And for whatever reason, maybe they can't afford it, right? And so Strata's tried to offer that. We're continuing to offer that free 90-day speed bump for any existing subscriber as well. They can call in. That's still going on. Call in, get Shelly's team, and they can look at your connection and tell you what speeds are available there and bump you up if it's a possibility for you. And you can use that at no additional cost for the next 3 months. Several community Wi-Fi locations that we've popped up, right, Brent? What is there, 15 to 20 now at this point, scattered throughout the Uinta Basin, where consumers can just go and use those connection points also if they need to for whatever reason, right?
Yeah, at least that many. Yep. We have other sites that we're looking at trying to expand that, and even keep those there permanently so that they can be a tool and an asset in the future for our customers.
Yeah, and if a customer wants to access those, obviously there's a list and a map of those on our website, stratanetworks.com. Take a look at those. Any parting thoughts from you two? I think it's been a great conversation. Anything you want to add here at the end?
No, just if you have a problem, give us a call. We're here.
Yeah. How about you, Brent?
Well, I mean, I don't have a lot. Most of us grew up here. We love our community, and we just want to help. I mean, we want to provide a good, robust service that people can enjoy, and we're part of the community. We like working here. We like what we do, and we like challenges. So we want people to bring them to us and let us help them figure them out.
Yeah, absolutely agree. All right, we appreciate our listeners. If you have any comments or questions as a follow up to this conversation, we definitely encourage folks to shoot us an email. You can email us at podcast@stratanetworks.com, or you can comment in the thread where this will be posted. We'll put this podcast out on obviously social media platforms and on all of the typical podcast platforms as well. Would love to hear some feedback from our listeners. If there's items that we talked about today that were a little too technical or not technical enough, we'd be happy to do another follow-up to this discussion. So appreciate you two taking the time to have this conversation with us.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks again for listening to the Strata Networks podcast.